Good afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce you to this first session with us around special education needs and every teacher a teacher of SEND. These are sessions that we've put together to bring experts to a space where we can talk around a range of different issues related to working with those with special educational needs. And I'm delighted to introduce Amy Storer, Richard Jones, and Tara Swarbreck to this session to share more around creating the right environment and building the connection for all of our pupils to succeed. We're joined by Amy, an experienced leader and coach, Richard Jones, an exec head teacher, and Tara Swarbreck, an education consultant, who are going to share their expertise with us this afternoon. So really looking forward to this hour ahead. And Amy, I'm going to pass over to you now and really looking forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Susanna, for setting us up. Welcome, everybody. We're very aware that we've got two audiences going on today. We've got the people in the room, and then we've got the people who are going to be accessing this at a later point. You are all very welcome here. We're talking about something that's really pertinent, that's really important, and we're hoping that as well as feeling reassured at the end of this next we're going to go 45 minutes, and we're going to gift you 15 minutes extra time that you might not have been expecting. But we're hoping by the end of it, you will feel really reassured in your current practice. We're hoping that some of the things we talk about may provoke and may challenge some of your thinking around this idea of emotional regulation and co-regulation and our role within that as the grown-ups. And then we're also hoping that there will be a couple of new bits of learning that will enhance and complement those mental models that you've already got building in terms of SEND practice. So that's our endeavour. My name's Amy Storer. I am an exec leader. We might just need to close the door, which is cool. My name's Amy Storer. I'm an executive leader. I work with multi-academy trusts and local authorities at an exec level, supporting them with all things leadership, behaviour and SEND, particularly around SEMH and communication and interaction. And before that, I was a substantive head and associate head for 10 years at a large multi-academy trust in the East Midlands. We achieved some real success at our school. The metrics of success that one might use to measure impact, so Ofsted ratings, pupil outcomes, children number on roll, being an employer of choice. We ticked all of those off. And I'm not telling you this because I'm bragging about what we achieved, although I am incredibly proud of what we achieved there. I'm telling you this because, as you will know, when we start to achieve success in a space, people will start to ask us, well, what did you do? And I can hand on heart say that the two biggest reasons why we started to hit success over in Derby was because of the team of people and because we prioritised inclusive practice and belonging. And both of those are really pertinent to the conversation that we're going to be having together this afternoon. How do we create a space where all children and or adults genuinely feel like they're seen, they're heard, they're understood, they're wanted and they're loved? And ultimately, when we're talking about emotions, when we're talking about big behaviours, when we're talking about co-regulation, that is what we're talking about. I'm really delighted to have two colleagues here with me today, two experts in this space. Firstly, I'm going to introduce Tara. Tara is an exceptional practitioner and consultant who works with educators, supporting them in knowing what it means to truly understand and connect with the children in their class. Not at a superficial level, but genuinely getting to know each and every one of the little people, the big people that we work with, and being able to create a space where those children feel well held and a place where they feel safe enough and ready enough to be able to learn. She's also a huge advocate for parents, and as a parent of a gorgeous little boy who has got some additional needs himself, she brings real integrity and a real deep wisdom to this work. And so I'm really delighted, Tara, that you have joined us this afternoon.
Thank you.
I'm also delighted to have Richard Jones. Richard Jones is a highly experienced senior leader. He started his career in education in a secondary school and then moved to primary and has carved out a very special path for himself in terms of the leadership space. He knows systems and processes more than any person I've ever met. People like me need people like him. But his leadership is so much more than that. There's compassion, there's care, and he is a real expert when we're talking about behaviour at both an individual level, but also at an organisation and a system level as well. So you're in safe hands, everybody, in terms of this chat. And the structure it's going to take is we're going to engage in a professional conversation around all things emotions, behaviour, regulation. And then if you've got any questions that come up for you, any queries or any comments, you are invited to put those into the chat. We're going to build in some time towards the end in case anyone's brave enough to actually speak those questions out loud as well. But if either Lisa or Susanna are okay just to monitor the chat just so that we don't miss anything, you will see that the three of us are incredibly passionate about this work, and therefore we may become really immersed in it. So I can't guarantee that we'll be able to keep an eye on what's going on in the text. But we'll crack on straight away then. So I'm going to come to you first, Richard. We are here today, we're talking about readiness to learn, and we're looking at it through the lens of behaviour, emotions and regulation. Why this? Why now? Why even bother about this?
Big question to start off with, and there's loads of different answers that we could explore with that, but I think you've already hit on a couple of big reasons in the introductions. For me, no good learning can take place without relationships. Relationships are foundational to human existence. And when we think about some of the young children in our care, when we think about those indices of vulnerability and the multi indices of discipline of vulnerability that they experience, they need strong relationships more than anybody. So yes, schools are establishments where we want really good learning, but particularly post-COVID, when our foundations were shook, schools have recognised that they cannot get anywhere close to readiness for learning without exceptional relationships. And what I'm not saying there, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Tara, I'm not saying that we don't have really firm boundaries and that we don't have set rules and set ways of doing things at school. You've already mentioned systems and processes, and that will come up quite a bit. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we need those really firm boundaries in place, and that children need to know where they stand. But we do that with compassion. We do it with love. We do it with the children knowing that they've got a safe space to come to and a safe adult to approach when they come to our school every day, because for some of them, they don't have that elsewhere. So it's absolutely fundamental that we get that right. And why now? Well, why never? Why never before? Why are we just talking about this now? It shouldn't be something that we're just talking about now. This has been an ongoing and perennial issue, particularly as children get older. We're looking at behaviours of older children, particularly those in secondary. Well, actually, we need to backtrack that and look at what's missing. What is the gap? What is the need? Why are we having children come into school in such a place that they're not ready to learn? So I think it's fundamental that we attack that from the two prongs, that we look at where the gap is and how we can fill that gap. But we have to focus on relationships to start off with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I take from what you say there, Richard, is this idea of looking upstream. So Desmond Tutu says to us, rather than just keep pulling these people out of the river, we need to look upstream and we need to work out why they're falling in the first place. And when we talk about looking upstream, we're talking about early intervention to prevent things getting to crisis. And that works on every level, doesn't it? So that's not just in terms of preventing significant crises at secondary, but it also, if we think about some of these big behaviours that we're seeing, it's about intervening when we're starting to see those antecedents of behaviour, when we're starting to see those, some people might call it triggers, for example. We intervene then, because that is what enables us to stop children from getting to that curve of crisis. which is, as we all know, is really quite challenging to be able to support them down from. Tara, is there anything you want to add about the importance of this work and why we need to be devoting real time and consideration to it now?
There is so much that I could add, so you will have to wind me in, because sometimes I do go off on a tangent. I made a few points from what you were saying, Richard, and I think for me it's very much about those foundations of getting it right from the very beginning, and that's what we're missing. So a lot of my experience was in the early years, and I always go back to the early years because they're the foundations. So when we are seeing those behaviours later on, we have to go back to the root, and we have to look at why and ask the why. What need has not been met? So when I talk about need and what has not been met, and in line with the foundations, I talk about feeling safe, seen, soothed, and secure. They are the foundations for well-being. So for any of us, any age, children or adults, this includes us as well, as we are now learning. If there are cracks in those foundations, we are going to be seeing those behaviours. Now, connection, everything we're talking about here, emotional regulation, relationships, environments, when we go back to the core, relationships and environments are key. We know that. So what's going on around the child? And behaviour is huge. We are never going to, it's really difficult. I have this conversation all the time. It's so complex. And I think sometimes people think, oh, you naturally have the answer. This is not about, and I want to be really clear here, this is not about fixing any child at all. What this is about learning and understanding and really seeing children for children. I'm very passionate about this for many reasons. As Amy said, I'm also a parent as well as a professional, and I can see the impact. If we miss that, if we miss those foundations, then that's what we're seeing come to light later on. So it is really key, and those foundations, I can't stress enough. Whilst it is complex, the basics are very simple. And I think that will lead us into everything else that we'll go on to discuss. But the basics are very simple, and we have to start with the basics, and we have to go back to the root, because often I always say we deal with the fruit and not the root, and we have to look at what that is. And as Amy and Richard both said, what is this child displaying? What are they communicating? What does this look like? And just get curious. Start with a curious lens, and it begins there, and the rest will follow. But providing we have that shift, providing we have that lens to shift and be curious and want to be curious. And going back to what Richard said, this isn't allowing children, and there is, there is this at the moment in terms of conversation. We're allowing children to dictate, or they're showing defiance, or they're showing this, or they're showing that. No, that's our role. We have to hold ourselves accountable here and teach children those skills. There are reasons we're in the crisis that we're in. And for many of us, we're learning those skills as well alongside children. So I am very much about, whilst we say meet children where they're at, we're also meeting adults where they're at too. So it is about compassion, it is about connection, it is about empathy, it is about kindness, curiosity, all of those things that all link in together. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, amazing, thank you. I just want to pick up on this idea of curiosity, Tara, that you've taken us to. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Richard, to take an executive leader's thoughts on this. Curiosity is a huge tool that we've got in our toolkit. And in a time where we don't have lots of expendable money to put into things, it's something that's also free. So what I'd like to do, though, is I'd like to reframe this idea of curiosity. And before we even come to talking about looking at children's behaviours through a curious lens, I'd like to unpick the reason why it's firstly important that we look at ourselves through a curious lens, through our own experiences, our own stories. Why would you say, Richard, from an exec point of view, that is an important place to start before we start diving into a child's behaviours?
Yeah, I think at a very simple level, we all have experiences, and we bring those experiences with us. We also, as humans, have biases. And as if we're using the antecedents and the triggers, then certain things, when we experience them again, either, you know, through a child or through a group of children, can cause us to revert back to our biases or not be able to clearly identify our own blind spots, and then to very quickly, as Tara said, focus on the fruit. So focus on what we're seeing presented in front of us. So I think there's something definitely around conversations and CPD with your staff and with the staff team, around what each of us brings to the party, if you like. What experiences have we got? What does that allow us to think about? How does that allow us to empathize or not? So there's something around the makeup of your team and being curious about the adults and their experiences allows you then at an exec level, if you like, or even at a strategic level, to look at where staff might best be placed to support or not support, or where they might be able to bring experience to situations that you are experiencing in school, either through I've got some lived experience here, I can talk to you about this firsthand, or not. So I think that idea of us being curious and the adults being curious about each other can then lead us into a deeper conversation, a richer conversation around becoming curious about the adults. Ultimately, we don't know what we don't know. And if we have got blind spots, we need somebody to point them out for us so that we're not doing our young people or each other or our team a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well put. And I'm just wondering, so we may have colleagues who find themselves in a school or an organisation where this is a priority, where this space is really well understood. We may also have colleagues with us where there is a little bit more development until we get to a place where this is part of the culture. Tara, could you help us out if we're thinking about starting this work in a place where we're curious about ourselves? What are some of the practical strategies that we can do as teachers, as HLTAs, as educators? What can we do to find out more about our own triggers, our own biases, and maybe even the way our own nervous systems have activated? We know that we all have a default. We know we all have one, whether that's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. How can we start to understand more about ourselves, Tara, in a practical way?
So understanding yourself, it's a big question, isn't it? I always, when I go into these conversations, I start with the question, how well do you know yourself? And do we really know ourselves? And these are hard, honest conversations I've had to have with myself too. And this is a journey. I relate to it as a journey, and people will say differently, but you know, it's perspective, isn't it? I follow something really simple in terms of a framework as such, or steps. At first, we get curious. So we get curious because when we get curious, we have an openness, we have a willingness to want to learn more. And there's no right or wrong with this. So it's allowing yourself to feel, and I think that's key. So in terms of when we're talking connection, emotional regulation, behavior, all of these things come back to a feeling. So when I'm talking about a feeling, many of us, through doing this, you know, whether that's emotion coaching or trying to understand behaviors or our own approach and what that looks like, we have to be curious enough to know how we are feeling in terms of our regulation too and our own nervous system. So I'm trying to keep this really simple and not too complex. But if we break that down, when we get curious, we can start to ask the questions. And when I say to start to ask the questions, that's to make us to become aware. So many of us live on autopilot, don't we? Racing through the day. We often, how do we have the time to actually just stop and tune in? We're driven on that auto drive all of the time. So we have to become aware of ourselves and how we're feeling and how our body is communicating. So often we feel like we have to think up here, but actually it starts in here. So when I'm saying in here, I'm touching my heart. I don't know if you can see on the camera, I'm feeling my heart, because that's where it comes from. So when we're talking about behaviors and we're talking about understanding ourselves and we're talking about emotional regulation and connection, it comes from a feeling, it comes from a heart, because that's what makes us human. So we have to do this from a human being perspective. we are all human beings and we all have that same connection. So in terms of our teams, regardless of, sometimes we get so caught up in the practice and the policies and the changing and the government changes and all of these things that are out of our control. We can't control that. What we can control is us. So this comes with honesty, it comes with vulnerability. It can be very raw and it can be very personal, but it's about having an openness to have those conversations and to just question. Because if we don't question, we don't move forward and we don't learn and we get stuck. So when we're talking about narratives and we're talking about rewiring the brain and all of those things, many of us are actually rewiring our own brains. We're rewiring those narratives from what we've been, what we've grown up with. And that's okay. Like, take that pressure off. That's okay. Be kind, be accepting. And I say this all the time, you have to be kind to yourself. This isn't about shaming. It's not about blaming. It's not about judgment. There's none of that. This is about empathy. It's about compassion. It's about understanding. It's about kindness. So we start with curiosity. We form an awareness of ourselves, because then through that awareness, we have an understanding. And when we can have an understanding of our own regulation and our own nervous system, we have an understanding of how we respond. Do we respond or do we react? And when we can question ourselves and we can look at ourselves in terms of what that looks like, physically what that looks like, we can gain an acceptance of who we are. And acceptance is key. So before we move on to the trust, the connection, the belonging, and the growth, we have to have an acceptance. And when we have the acceptance of ourselves, I personally believe that's when we start to see that shift. And when we start to see that shift and we've gone on that journey, we develop that, I'm talking from experience, we develop that more empathetic approach to children, and we can then feel with children.
Yeah, absolutely, Tara. Yeah, really beautifully said. And I think one of the things just to pull out from a practical point of view in terms of the way we show up and the way that we work within our own classrooms is the difference between being reactive and being responsive. And a quick tip that helps us, because that's not always easy, a quick tip that helps us with that is the power of the pause. So when something has happened, whatever that might be, it's very difficult at times to not react. The way that we can create new habits around that, though, is we create a pause. So we give ourselves a breath. But there aren't many things that get worse from having a pause. Like, most things have a pause. You think about your heart, even the way your heart beats, there's a pause in it. Even the organ of life requires a pause. So having a pause, connecting with the brain, connecting with the heart, as Tara has just really eloquently said, enables us to make sure that we're really trying hard to respond to some big behaviours, not to react to it. And certainly within the adults, so Tara, Richard and myself, we're very much of the opinion that all behaviour is a form of communication. Some of that is going to be dysregulation, where there isn't choice. Some of that, there will be learned behaviours, and some of that, there will be choice there. But we are of the belief that all of that tells us and communicates something to us about that child. And the reason why those behaviours are so important as we become behaviour detectors is because I'm sure you've seen the iceberg model before. If not, it's in your resource pack that we're going to follow up with after today's session. The behaviours are the things that we see. But we know from an iceberg that there's a vast amount, a vast body of ice that is underneath the ocean too. And that's all the stuff that we don't see. That's the stuff we need to get curious about. So Richard, I'm going to come to you now. Let's do a practical scenario here. We've got a child in our class who is really displaying some big behaviours. So in terms of the iceberg model, they are communicating loud and clear. Where do you start? Because that can feel quite overwhelming and it can feel quite draining when it's happening regularly. What do you do when you're experiencing some big behaviours driven by some big emotions?
Yeah, and I don't think there is one set way of responding, because let's put that out there. And first of all, I think it's checking to make sure, as Tara said, that you're the right person to respond to these behaviours and this communication, that you've got some form of relationship there, and that you have gone through that pause so that you can be in a place where you're regulated yourself. Dysregulated adults can't help to co-regulate and then work towards self-regulation of children. And again, it will depend on the scenario. If it's an unsafe scenario, then your first thing to do is to make the environment as safe as possible. So whether that be, removing the child or removing others from that environment, but we need to make sure that we make that environment safe. And then we need to keep, the main aim here is to try and bring the child back down from that crisis curve. So we know that can take a considerable amount of time. So we need to meet the child where they're at. Now, we're not going in with shouting, and we're not going in with matching volume, etc. But we are going in by recognizing and validating what the child is going through. So Tara mentioned earlier this idea of emotion coaching. So making the child feel as though they're being seen and heard, I think, is the first point. Acknowledging, so for example, at both my settings, we use zones of regulation. So there is some common language across all of our classrooms with all of our adults and with all of our learners. So it would be something along recognizing that I can see that you're in the red zone at the moment, and validating that. I think that might be because, and try to put some narrative there. But again, keeping vocab to a minimum. We don't want to overload, because at the moment we are probably in a bit of fight or flight mode. And then at that point, it's trying to either talk the child down, validating, acknowledging, talking through what might have happened, or not. So a child might not want to respond. They might not be able to physiologically respond, but by being with them, sitting alongside them, just being that presence. Sometimes them just knowing that you are there and that there is a safe person there ready to take over and have a communication and a conversation with them when they're at a point is all they need. I think the biggest thing for me is matching the child where they're at and having that almost a script that you might follow. So there's some common language there. Again, you'll follow your policies as a setting, but you'll know what that child needs. So go into your scripted outcomes and look at what you can do to repair that situation, but at a point where you're bringing the child back down to baseline. So if, for example, you've got a safe space, if, for example, you've got a sensory provision, if you know that running around the hall or doing a sensory circuit or using some gym equipment outside would work, putting the provision in place that you know will help to re-regulate the child. Now, that will be very bespoke. And if we go back to talking about adults, there's a fine balance there between that being seen as reward when actually it's not. What are we doing here? We're giving the child what they need to bring them back down to a baseline. In our school, it's to get them back to the green zone as much as possible. And then if we talk very quickly about the emotion coaching cycle, it's talking about what other outcomes could there have been there? What other options were there? And then what do we need to do to repair that relationship, either with your class, your teacher, the adult, somebody else? But you've got to go through that process of immediately making the situation safe, meeting the child where they are to bring them back to baseline, re-regulating them, acknowledging what's happened and thinking of other options, and then repairing any damage to relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to stress a couple of those points that you just made in terms of that process. First being the importance of having a script around this, because we're sat probably in very comfy chairs at this moment in time. We're very regulated ourselves. So it might be very easy for us to consider the words that we would use and the actions that we would take to regulate alongside a child. That's not always the case when we're doing this in real time. And even if we are super aware of our own triggers around certain things, it's not always easy to regulate those at the time in which they're happening. What the script allows us to do is the script allows us to frame our response in a structured, measured way. It removes some of the potential fire and charge that we might unintentionally add to a situation by saying things that might feel very natural. For example, oh, don't cry. Oh, there's nothing to worry about. Oh, you've got yourself into such a tiz. No, not helpful. Very natural, very widespread in terms of the way that we might respond in situations. But what Richard has really beautifully and eloquently explained to us is the biggest thing that we can do with a child who is at a point of dysregulation is to help them name the emotion, to validate the emotion, and then to create space. Because the second point I just want to stress about what Richard has just talked us through is the dip that happens after crisis. So we're here, we're on our way up, we hit crisis. Because of the constraints, the pressures, we have got maths to get on with. They've not done their learning, it's break time, I've got PPA, they're going to music, we've got assembly. Because of all those pressures, the danger is that we try and have the restorative conversation here at the top, or even on the way down. When we do that, we re-escalate. So that pause and that opportunity to connect before we correct needs to hit, we hit a pit at that bottom bit, and that's when we start to have those conversations. Otherwise, we just add charge and fire to it. So yeah, I think that's wonderful, Richard, and a really helpful and clear way to map the process of what our role is within co-regulation. Is there anything you want to add? I'm just thinking, Tara, about some of the wonderful work that you've done around the importance of grounding and breath work. Could you just talk us through that as a strategy within that process too?
Yeah, and also just going back to what you were both saying, it does come down to the unique child. And this is what is, I think, a challenge for many educators of really knowing the child, really. And when I say really knowing, what works for one child isn't going to work for another child. So we really have to be mindful in our approach of what that could look like. And in terms of when we're talking about that crisis point, whether it's zones of regulation, whether you're using your, your thermometers or whatever that looks like within your school environment, it's being preventive and proactive enough not to keep, like as Amy and Richard were saying, not to keep that distress continuing. So this is where breath work is all about. Some people will roll their eyes at breath work, can I say? We are still experiencing that, but there is a reason breath work is so valuable to all of us, adults and children. This is all about, I'm not going to get all scientific, but this is all about how we communicate between our brain and our bodies, and this is what we want to get to in terms of regulation. So when our body is communicating to us, we're going to see that through the behaviour. So if you're seeing those big surface behaviours, and not always those big surface behaviours, when we're talking about the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, we also have to think of those children that are the people pleasers that get on with their work, the maskers that we might see in the class, or maybe we don't see. So it's really important when we're thinking of the breath work, the impact this is having internally, and that's where we need to get to. So breath work is essential for calming the nervous system. Breath work is about safety. Breath work is about feeling emotionally safe and emotionally secure. And breath work is what helps us come down from that crisis curve. Breath work is what enables us to feel grounded again. So it's about being present. So when I was talking about for ourselves as well as children, going through those steps of getting curious, having an awareness and understanding and an acceptance, we have to know our own regulation states. We have to know how our energy shifts. We have to know what might escalate us. We also have to know what helps calm us. It's not always about calming. Sometimes it's just shifting. What do we need right now? Something simple that I use for myself, and then I'll go on to children, and also something I use when I'm working with adults and parents, is something really simple step-by-step framework. So firstly, I notice. What are we noticing in our body? I notice, I feel, when, because, I need. And if we follow those really simple steps, and these are those scripts that you can have, and you can have them on posters around your classrooms, you can have them in the staff rooms, or even on your lanyards. They're just really simple key reminders to check in with ourselves, just like we check in with children. So if we are noticing and paying attention to ourselves, if we know we're rushing straight into maths next, or rushing straight into whatever that looks like, have a quick check-in. Have that breath, take a deep breath to know you're going in ready. Because if we show up dysregulated, if we show up rushing in the classroom, emotions are contagious. Children will pick up on that. They mirror us. So we're setting that tone for that lesson right away. So let's go right back to the beginning of the day. How can we incorporate, and this is something I work with the schools, how can we incorporate those mini moments that matter the most, is what I call them, and they only have to be mini moments. So if that is a case where, okay, you're about to open that gate, the children are about to come in, we don't know what evening that child has had, we don't know what morning that child has had, we only see them when they walk through that door. So for all we know, that child could have had a 3-hour meltdown the night before. For all we know is that child may have had a 2-hour meltdown just leaving the house. So as they're entering, their fuel tank is empty. So when I talk about a fuel tank, I refer to this as in our, this is work that I do with children, meeting children where they're at, helping them understand too, in terms of how full they're feeling. And it works for us too. So when we say put your own oxygen mask on, this is exactly that. So how can we ensure we are ready? Even if we don't feel it, how can we ensure we're ready? And that simply comes with, it sounds simple, I know, it's not that simple to do, but if we can have these regular check-ins with ourselves, 3 deep breaths before we start the day. It might be something simple as you start your lessons with a 2-minute mindfulness in the morning. Welcome the children in. Right, let's prepare ourselves before we start. Get them in a place ready to learn, because they might not be ready to learn if they've already had whatever morning that they've had. So let's get them ready and in a place of safety. When I'm saying this isn't easy. I'm very aware this is not easy, because also you might have had a morning too. So let's be balanced. Let's put this into perspective. We all know we have our own lives going on, and we also don't know what we're dealt with in the morning. So how can we help each other, and how can we work as a team? So if we implement this throughout our day to day, how can we implement that before, your staff meetings, before you start your day? What does that look like? Your break times, how are you making time for you? How are you making time that you have those moments too? So when going back, I'll ramble on, sorry, let's pull it back. So when we come back to the breath work, those moments do matter, but it also helps you, not just children. So it's learning together. And I talk about this being a 2-way journey, listening, learning and growing together, because this is what it's about. It's about a relationship. We want them to see us as human beings too. We also treat them like human beings. We're giving them that toolkit just as much as we're giving ourselves that toolkit. A really simple one that I love to do, and I'll do it over and over again, is the grounding exercise with the 5 senses. Really, really simple. 5 things you can hear. This could be as soon as they walk in. 5 things you can hear. 4 things you can see. 3, you can do this in any order. 3 things you can touch. 2 things you can taste. 1 thing you can smell. Let's bring our awareness to the present right now. And it's that grounding that brings us to the present. Because often we're stuck up here in our thoughts. We have to get in touch within here. And that's what grounding is. So you might hear these buzzwords used a lot at the moment. People might roll their eyes at mindfulness. People might roll their eyes at grounding. They're effective for a reason. And this is all about our nervous system. This is all about regulation. And this is all about how we can help manage the distress and dysregulation of children, but also manage ourselves and our own well-being within that.
Yeah.
I have got something really simple for children, which I always show because it's really simple but powerful. and children love it. The breathing balls, they are so effective. I don't know if you can see. They're so effective. They don't cost a lot, but if we can have little tools like this available and ready within our classroom, set up, it's part of the environment. So it comes back to what Richard said. Just as we talk about relationships, the environment is just as important. So how are we setting that up for the morning? How are we getting that ready? And this helps us too.
Amazing. Yeah, no, thanks, Tara. That's wonderful. And it's probably just a good time now to say that when we're designing professional learning, and you all know this as educators, in terms of the way that we take knowledge from our very, very limited working memory and we integrate it into our much more stable, much more reliable long-term memory. One of the ways we do that is we give ourselves options to keep referring back and to keep retrieving. So to support everyone in that, we are going to be sending across a resource that includes some of the theory, some of the stuff that we've talked about in terms of, and we've alluded to in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but then a really beautiful menu of practical strategies that we can use when we've identified that children's nervous systems have been activated in a certain way. Things like the breathing balls, things like the colour monsters, things like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the reorientation practices. So we've got all of those practical strategies in a resource pack that we're going to gift to you. I said at the start that we're going to give some extra time as well, and we've got a few more minutes. So what I'm going to come to Richard and I'm going to come to Tara, and I just want your top tip. So if you were one of our colleagues in the room today or listening and watching this later on, what would be that key bit of powerful knowledge that you would want them to take away as their thing that they're going to really, really prioritise to remember? Richard, I'm going to come to you first.
Oh, there's so many. This is going to be hard, but I think I'm going to go to one that Tara has alluded to already. And it's a quote from Dr. Rob Long, who is a really, really good behaviouralist. And it is, if you can predict it, you can prevent it. Now, that works to a point. My point there is learn your children, identify the potential antecedents or trigger points, and then to go full circle, go back to your systems and processes. So build times into your day. We're all time poor, but actually by spending 5 minutes in the morning doing what Tara suggested, you are potentially preventing 3, 4, 5 children from getting to crisis point and them not being able to access learning. So my key tip, really know your children. If you can predict it, you can prevent it.
I've not heard you say that for a while. It's very satisfying. So for all of the reasons, yeah, I love that one. If you can predict it, you can prevent it. Tara, what would be your powerful bit of knowledge that you would really want people to take away in terms of what we've been talking about this afternoon?
Okay, I'm just going to keep it really simple because I said, whilst this is complex, the basics are very simple. And believe me, I have learned this the hard way. Connection, always, for me. And when I say connection, this isn't always through words. We don't always have to have the answers, but take that pause and just see. And when I say just see, I mean really see and really tune in and listen. And then if there's anything that has stuck with me, when you are seeing those really big, explosive behaviours that absolutely are, when we're dysregulated, hard to deal with. We're not saying this is easy, because it isn't. I want you to imagine, no matter how old that child is, I want you to picture them as an absolutely scared, terrified, petrified 2-year-old. What would you give to that 2-year-old? And how can you give that to the child in front of you right now?
Yeah, absolutely. That feels like a very, very, very a perfect place to end our conversation. Thank you to Richard. Thank you to Tara. I think what will have come across within this professional conversation that we've shared alongside you is that this matters. We care about this. It doesn't matter what phase or stage you work at in terms of education. This is the crux of what we do. And before we even get onto any of the cognitive stuff, this is the area that we're prioritising. We've got to get this right. And this is how we create meaningful change. And this is how we support ourselves, our children and our families at times when the turbulence feels strong and the chaos feels loud. We just want to say a huge thank you to Lisa and to Susanna for inviting us. We want to say a huge thank you to everyone that's on the call. We want to say a huge thank you to everyone that's listening after this. We care about this stuff, and if we ever have an opportunity to talk about it, you can bet your bottom dollar that we're going to take it. So Lisa, I'm going to hand back over to you. Thank you.
Wow, I've got an unenviable task now of trying to sum up those key messages, and what a lot of expertise, what a lot of ideas, what a lot of strategies actually that you can go away and use in your classroom straight away. I think some of this is around your approach, isn't it? And one of those key things that has been a thread throughout for me is around your compassion, everybody. All three of you have spoken about your messages with a huge amount of compassion for the children that we're working with, and that relationship building and that connection is at the heart of everything we do, and that's what makes the difference, and that's what helps us to address these challenges that we face, isn't it? And you've given us lots of different ideas on that, and lots of key messages to support us. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, sharing your expertise and talking us through some of those really important messages that can help us to support our young people in the classroom.